Hey, I thought I would make another video. Actually, someone requested it, and that was to talk a little bit about salaries and how we are paid as Pilates teachers. So, I'm gonna try to be pretty brief in this one. I do have a ton of thoughts, but I think I can be fast in what I say. So the first thing to know about me is I actually have my own business. I run my own studio, so I get to manage money all on my own. Part of why I decided to do that though, not part of why, the reason why was because I was having a really hard time finding a studio setup that I thought made financial sense. The first thing that I would recommend to anyone who is just starting out as a Pilates teacher or who is considering to do a Pilates teacher training program is to meet with a financial advisor, like your accountant or however it works wherever you live, and sit down and figure out how much money you need to be making an hour. Like, for real. That's what I did. And that was vital. Now, when you're calculating how much money you need to be making an hour, what you also need to take into account is, first of all, what's realistic from what you've observed in studios. Are you looking at a studio where you need to build up your clientele as private clients? Is it a studio that does group classes? Is the studio that does group classes paying differently because of lockdown or COVID or whatever it is? And then also taking into account things like travel time, break time, all of those kinds of things. But get really, really clear on, first of all, how much money do you need to be making annually or monthly? And then what does that look like hourly for what you're expecting? From there, this is not like a perfect number, but it's going to give you at least a base point to go out and start looking at what's available to you and start negotiating or having real honest conversations with studios and yourself, your friends and family about what it is that you'd like to be doing. So the person that asked me to do this video was saying, well, you know, how much should we get paid? Do you get paid like 30 bucks an hour? Like, what's that mean? So for context, I mean, I don't live in the United States. So that's one thing. 30 bucks is not what I would be paid here typically, although I have seen studios offer those kinds of rates, which is way too low. But when you're looking and talking to a studio that's like offering those kinds of rates and pro head rates, there's a couple other things to keep in mind. The first thing, number one, is the studio going to be paying you for pre-class time, as in the time that you have to show up at the studio beforehand to set up, clean the machines, you know, whatever it is you need to do, turn on the lights, turn on music, however it is that studio functions. Are you paid for that time? Are you paid for time between classes? With that, is there a break between classes, like a significant break between classes? Significant break to me is anything beyond 10 minutes. And then the last thing is, are they paying you on top of that base $30 an hour or whatever it is? Are they paying you per head? Now, the issue of being paid per head is obviously only relevant if we're talking about group classes, but it's really vital when you think about that, to think about the likelihood it is of you actually filling those classes. Now, I've seen it done very often that studios offer to pay per head as kind of an incentive to you, that if your classes are great or you're really active on social media, that then you're going to be able to fill those classes no problem. There's a couple issues going into that I observe, at least. Number one, let's talk about marketing. A lot of studios say, well, you just need to promote yourself more. The way I see it, that is not your responsibility as an employee in any studio to promote yourself on social media. That's the responsibility of your employer, the studio, to invest the time and the money to do that. Now, if the studio is going to pay you, let's say they pay you to do an hour of your own social media every week, you know, that's a different story. And you can think about that. I mean, you can do whatever you want, you're an adult, but you might think like, okay, this makes sense for me. So that's the first issue. Are you actually getting paid to promote yourself? Because promoting yourself is a ton of work and it takes a lot of time. The second thing to think about as well is not all class times are created equal. This is an issue that I've definitely butted heads with studio owners, and yeah, it is what it is. But for me, I've seen a significant difference in the ease of filling a class at, let's say, 7:30 at night versus at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, for example. So you might be a fantastic teacher who does an amazing job, but you're allotted a time that just is tricky to fill. You know, if you're talking about a lunchtime class, those classes can be a little bit harder if it's like December and people are really slammed at work wrapping up for the year. It has nothing to do with your abilities to teach or your qualities to teach or even what the customer thinks of you. It just has to do with the time. The other thing I will say on that is that there's also the challenge, and this is where I would love to see more unity within the Pilates world, of the preconceived notions that people have about what their workout should look like and how they judge a teacher based off of those preconceived notions. So for example, you might be a teacher who's really, really focused on individual attention and safety and making sure that your clients understand what it is that they're doing and why. You're not someone who's gonna go in and just give people a hard workout because that's what they think that they want and need. You might be like, you know what? That's not what I stand for. I'm gonna make sure they get it. Now, depending on the studio environment, people might go in and say, well, that person's not delivering what I want, so I'm not going to show up for their class because it's not a kick in the ass, essentially. That is the other major issue I see with paying per head. The other issue with that, to kind of build on top of that, is also issues of subconscious bias or very conscious bias that people have. So what happens, for example, when an individual doesn't quote unquote look the role of a Pilates teacher? I know people personally who've experienced this. They've been fat shamed, not just or by their clients, by their customers directly, and haven't gotten support from their studio or their coworkers, that's not okay. The issue with that is that then impacts those people twofold, because it obviously is going to impact their emotional and psychological health. Well, not obviously, but for many people it will. And the other thing is it impacts their paycheck, and that's a huge deal. That's really, really important. So those are kind of the three things I would say are problematic about getting paid per head. So again, that's the issues of bias that people have towards teachers, and how that might be impacting not just yourself, but the studio and the industry at large. The issue that not all class times are created equal. And there was one more thing, and I'm forgetting what it was, and I'm sure you guys are smart people and can remember. So the next thing you might be thinking is like, okay, well, this sounds all really tricky and hard and confusing. Maybe I'll just go independent. If you decide that you want to go independent, cool, good for you. That's also why I would suggest you talk to someone about your finances beforehand, so you understand what your minimum hourly needs to be. And then you need to be really clear with how much time it is you want to invest and how much leeway you want to give between hours. What I see happen very often is people, when they're starting out, is they try to price low because they feel self-conscious that they need to. And then they get into a situation where they realize, like, man, I'm working really hard and I'm not making enough money. What's important with all of this, I think the bottom line is, if you go out to become a Pilates teacher, ultimately this is a job. You might be looking at it as a part-time job, but it is a job. And that means we need to be paid for it. So if you find yourself setting yourself up in a situation as an independent, self-employed person or as an employee, and you're like, man, I'm not making any money, I would very much encourage you to reconsider that, and also like push back if you feel like you're being told this is how it is, this is our pay, and you're like, well, that's not good enough. You don't have to pay your dues. That's not required at all. this is how the economy gets all kinds of messy, but ultimately I also see it as really detrimental to the industry at large, because it sets us up for a position where basically no one is making any money, and we're saying it's acceptable that these studio owners or clients don't pay us enough for an hour of our time. So that was a lot of information. I hope it's helpful. Again, to recap, I would really recommend sitting down with an accountant, however it works wherever you live in the world, or just sitting in Excel and really figuring out what does your hourly need to be, and making sure that hourly includes all of the real things that come with being a Pilates teacher. The time that you show up before at the studio, the time it takes to clean up and leave the studio, the time talking to clients after their sessions, whatever it is. But you have to be really, really honest from the start. Then from there, making sure that if you're taking a job as an employee at a studio, that wage really reflects your hour and what you think your hour is worth. You don't have to cut corners. You don't have to show up unpaid an hour early. Studios can be paying for you for that because it's a job. And also, if you're going to go down the independent self-employment route, that you really are really honest with yourself there as well about how much money do I really need to be earning? What do I need to pay into my Social Security, any insurances, pension fund, all of that kind of stuff. And set it up, because this is your job. This is a real job. I'm really passionate about the issue around wages, probably because I started out my career working in schools and education. And I know firsthand, school teachers, they're often not paid well, but they are paid, hopefully, for, the time that they show up at school to turn the lights on and set up the classroom. We can be paid for that as well. As an industry, I'd love to see us support each other more to make sure that we're being paid fairly, and that we're not setting up a system that feeds into people's biases and leaves people just hanging by a thread. So I hope that was helpful. Hope it wasn't too grim, and let me know what you think. Thanks so much.